Whatever Happened to Janice Rand, Kevin Riley, and Dr. Mabenga? Part 2. This is episode 55.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casco, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
Last week we talked about some recurring characters on Star Trek who may have only been on a few episodes or may have been in a lot of episodes, but were in the background and maybe you didn't notice them. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casto. But this week, we wanted to talk about one character who had a substantial role in the early part of the first season and then just disappeared. Yes, I'm talking about Yeoman Janice Rand, played by Grace Lee Whitney.
But before we talk about Grace, I just want to remind listeners how they can find us. Just visit our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/70strek.
You can also send us an email to 70strek@gmail.com. And you can find the show on iTunes by searching 70s Trek in the podcast section. And if you will, please leave a rating or a review because it helps others find our show.
Kelly, did you know Grace Lee Whitney was intended to be one of the lead characters in Star Trek? But she was gone after 13 episodes.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just get started with a little bit of background on Grace first?
Please.
Grace was born April 1st, 1930 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Now, her name she was given at birth was not Grace Lee Whitney, but Mary Ann Chase. She was adopted by the Whitney family, who changed her name to Grace Elaine Whitney. And she later picked up the Grace Lee Whitney. She shortened the middle name a little bit.
That's pretty.
Yeah. She began her career at the age of 14. She was the quote-unquote girl singer on Detroit's WJR radio. She moved then in her late teens to Chicago, where she worked nightclubs. And she was an opening act for folks like Billie Holiday and Buddy Rich.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I mean, those are big names.
Oh, yeah. And at a young age, too.
Right.
This is about the time she became Grace Lee Whitney. She then toured with Spike Jones and Fred Waring bands. A lot of singing credit, that she had here at her early career.
That a lot of people don't know about.
Right. In the early 60s, she sang with Desi Arnaz Orchestra.
Isn't that something? Really? Yeah. Isn't that that's just kind of Twilight Zone-ish. Yeah, there's Desi, obviously, of Desi Lou Studios, and she will later work there. Just weird.
Yeah. Well, and she had a quote, she said, Desi was the biggest womanizer you ever met. And I was always fending him off.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's why he and Lucy got divorced.
Yeah, maybe. She went on to her debut acting was on Broadway, actually, a play called Top Banana. And she played the role of Miss Holland. Now, Top Banana starred Phil Silvers. And if you remember Phil Silvers. From back in the day.
Right. Yes, for you and I back in the day. Yeah, it was way back in the day.
Before our day.
Yes, it was.
It was a very successful play. It concluded on Broadway in 1952, and then it went on tour across the country, ending in L.A. in 1954. At that time, then, they were trying to make it into a movie, and most of the cast from the play reprise their roles in the movie, including Grace.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I got geeked out a little bit on this. They wanted to keep the movie, because this is like one of the first times they took a play and directly ported it to a movie, and meaning directly ported, they wanted it to feel exactly like you were at the play.
Oh, really?
And so they even used the same sets from the play. They just ported it right over to the lot and shot the movie. And they shot it in 3D with the idea being that you actually felt like you were at a play.
Oh, wow. That makes me want to go see this thing.
Yeah, me too. Me too. But you need those red and blue glasses to see it. Now, while she was in L.A., she landed another gig with a play. She got the role of Lucy Brown in the national tour of the Three Penny Opera. And she took over that role from B. Arthur. So,
Maud.
Yes. Yeah.
I love it.
And so that toured for a while. And then she, in 1958, is when she really started her acting in TV and movies outside of Top Banana. She had a total of 70 acting credits, according to IMDb. In 58, she had an uncredited role in The Naked and the Dead. She was cast in and this is kind of a big one, in 59, as one of the members of an all-female band in Billy Wilder's comedy, Some Like It Hot.
That was a big movie for its day.
Absolutely. And she didn't have really a bit part. She actually shared several scenes with Jack Lemmon, Tony Curtis, and Marilyn Monroe.
I remember seeing a picture of her during the train car scene in that upper berth with Jack Lemmon all done up as a girly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what that has to do with anything. I just thought I'd say that.
Me either. 61, she did Pocket Full of Miracles, again uncredited. 62, Public Affair, and she played a character, Tracy Phillips. So that was a decent role. She was in The Man from Galveston, and she played Texas Rose. Now, this is a Western, obviously. But in the cast was also Jeffrey Hunter.
Oh, nice.
Captain Pike.
Yeah.
Billy Wilder cast her again in 1963 in the feature role of Kiki the Kozak in Irma la Douche. I probably said that wrong. It's French. But it starred Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine. Again, not a bit role.
Right.
So let's move on to TV and her roles on TV. And she had literally hundreds of television appearances, even though IMDb says she has 70 acting credits.
Wait a minute. Did she have like uncredited roles?
Well, I wouldn't call them uncredited. She performed or frequently performed on live television shows, doing skits and that kind of thing. So those didn't go on her IMDb profile? No, no, not at all. So she was on, again, frequently she was on these shows. You Bet Your Life, hosted by Groucho Marx.
Yeah.
The Red Skelton Show, the Jimmy Durant Show, and I've never heard of this one, the Ernie Kovacs Show.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So she, again, on there, doing skits and whatnot. She was also in another show called Queen for a Day, and she was kind of the Vanna White person on that show.
Wow, she was busy.
Yeah, she was. And that was quite a bit of her, in the late 50s and 60s. She was in several TV series too. And I'm not going to name them all. There's a ton. But I'm going to highlight some of them. So The Real McCoys, Wagon Train, Gunsmoke, Bat Masterson, The Rifleman, several episodes of 77 Sunset Strip, Mike Hammer, Batman, a couple episodes of Batman, The Outer Limits.
With King Tut.
Yes, with King Tut. Yes.
Nice.
Exactly. The Outer Limits, Mannix, The Big Valley, Death Valley Days, and there was several episodes she was on there. And on Bewitched, she played a character, Babs Livingston, who was a Marilyn Monroe lookalike. Thought that was kind of interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you have anything else before Star Trek?
Well, sure. There was a couple TV movies. The one most notable is now this aired, I think, in 1967. It was the pilot, or supposed to be the pilot, for Police Story. So she was in that made-for-TV movie, but really a pilot. Mm-hmm. Gene Roddenberry wrote it.
Yes.
And it was his brainchild, and DeForest Kelley was also in it. Gene had said even that basically he used this for Grace's screen test for Star Trek.
Really?
Yeah, because they made it before Star Trek.
So unlike every other actor on Star Trek, Grace was not in The Lieutenant?
She was not. There was a mention of it, but...
I just thought I'd ask, because everybody else was, it seems like. Yeah, but this is how Roddenberry got to know her, was through Police Story.
Exactly.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So clearly he saw something in her that he wanted to bring to Star Trek. Grace was one of the first actors signed to the show right after Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner.
Yeah.
And in fact, what's weird is, because you don't think of it today, she was actually signed to be one of the leads. Right. You know, not a featured player like really Uhura or George Takei or even Scotty, believe it or not. And if you look at some of those early publicity photos, they feature Shatner, Nimoy, and Grace.
Right.
So it's interesting, too. In her book, she says that the character of Yeoman Rand was there to sort of recreate this chemistry that was on Gunsmoke between Sheriff Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty. Giving Captain Kirk like a friend, someone to talk to when he's upset.
A confidant type of
confidant, yeah, almost like a love interest that would never be acted upon. So they wanted to kind of create that loving sexual tension. You know, they might flirt a little bit, but you knew nothing was going to happen. But get the audience going, why won't he kiss her?
Right.
But of course, she only appeared in 8 episodes. Those episodes were The Man Trap, Charlie X, The Naked Time, The Enemy Within, Miri, The Corbomite Maneuver, The Conscience of the King, and Balance of Terror. And I think she had quite a memorable start. If you watch The Man Trap, and in Grace's first scene, she comes out of the turbo lift, and she walks by 2 crewmen. We don't know who these guys are. We never see them again. But one turns to the other, and he says, "How about that?" And the other guy says, "Yeah, how would you like to have her as your own personal yeoman?" Dude, it reminded me of, like, you and I when we were 20. You look at the girls on campus.
I never did that, by the way, for the record, Kathy.
For the record. Yeah, okay. I thought that was quite a start for Yeoman Rand's career aboard the Enterprise. If you watch some of those early episodes, I think her best work was in Charlie X and Miri.
Yes.
First of all, that's when she had the most lines. But she did a good job in those episodes, too.
Right.
And particularly Miri was really well done. You know, she kind of shows this range of emotions as they are affected with that disease, and she's upset, and she's telling Kirk, "God, I'm so upset, and on the bridge I tried to get you to look at me," and there's that whole sexual tension thing again.
Well, and then when she's got the disease or whatever, and she's basically kind of freaking out.
Yes, right, exactly. Also in Miri, Grace's 2 sons were in that episode, along with all the other dirty little kids. That her 2 sons were in that, and I think Shatner's daughter was as well. Yeah. So while Grace was thankful to have a good job, and it was a good paying job, and she could raise a family on that job, there was a bit of a drawback. Those uniforms were made to fit tightly on all of the actors, not just the females. Those poor actors, Shatner, Nimoy, all of them, they couldn't gain a pound without it showing. Even they talk about it in season 2. They called it the Battle of the Bulge, as Shatner would come back from the summer break and have a few too many pounds, and they'd have to say, Bill, did you look at this daily from today? And Shatner would look at it and go, okay. And he'd go work out and lose the weight and diet.
Until then, though, he got a girdle.
That came later, actually. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in season 3. You're right, though. Okay. He had to kind of wear a girdle. We'll talk more about this on the William Shatner episode.
Okay.
So, along with the other actors, Grace is very aware of her weight. You know, there are times when she goes in to get fitted for a costume, and they're saying to her, you might need to lose a couple of pounds. So she began to take diet pills to kind of lose a little bit and then maintain it once she got to where she wanted to be. In 1989, in her autobiography, she wrote, I was on diet pills trying to stay thin. And I was very thin. They wanted you to fit into the uniforms, and I couldn't quite, so I went on amphetamines. But she writes later on that the diet pills made her kind of edgy, kind of shaky, and so she began to drink to take that edge off. And unfortunately, this is where her story starts to take a turn. In Star Trek Memories, the book William Shatner wrote, he said that in the first few weeks of production, Grace became distracted, visibly ill, and her performances were suffering. He states that there were times when she was not able to perform. So her character was written out of episodes. Now, this is Shatner saying this. He maintains that she was written out of what little girls are made of. And in fact, her condition was so bad at one point that she was completely removed from Dagger of the Mind, and they had to bring in a guest character, Dr. Helen Noel. But supposedly, that was going to be her role. Now, in her book, Grace says, hey, look, I never drank at work. I drank during the evenings and on the weekends to take the edge off. But there was an incident in the first season that ended up leading to her being let go from the show. It was Friday, August 26th, 1966. It was about 7 o'clock. Shooting for that day on the episode Miri, ironically, it was Miri, had wrapped up. Now, at that time, there was a tradition on Friday nights that at the end of the week, as the actors went and changed and freshened up from their work, they would break out a wet bar and have kind of a party on the set. So at the party, along with everybody else, there was a network executive. And he typically was on the set a lot, representing NBC. And he asked Grace, hey, can I talk to you alone? I want to talk to you about some ideas I have for changing the show. And he suggested that they go find a quiet office and sit down. And she writes in her book that I was like, I don't know, but okay. And so they found an office. They turned on the stereo. They were listening to music, and they were still drinking. And at one point, it turned serious when this executive asked her to undress. And he began to take his shirt off. And she wrote in her book, this man had a lot of power over my future, and he expected me to come across. If I didn't, at that moment, I had a sinking feeling of horror, a sense of impending doom. I needed to get out of this situation somehow. Unfortunately, she didn't. And she didn't go into detail, but you can assume what happened. And she wrote that in the end, she did what this man told her to do. After that experience, she was pretty stunned. She says she doesn't remember a lot, and she didn't know what to do. And she ended up driving to Leonard Nimoy's house. She had a good relationship with Nimoy, and she sort of told him everything that had happened. Can you imagine? I mean, I have to admit, as I'm prepping for the show, I was really unsure about how to present this, but it it's what happened, and yeah. So
I read some of the details on it, and I don't want to go into it really here, but the guy was a nutcase anyways.
Scumbag.
Yeah, scumbag's a better word.
Because 4 days later, she got a call from her agent and was told that her character had been written out of the show and that she was done. Clearly, this guy had some, second thoughts afterwards going, wow, she could maybe come after me. Yeah. Or it was at that time, oh, you won't, you're not going to do what I'm telling you to do, maybe the way I want you to do it, so you're out. It was one or the other.
Right. Got it.
So she had a contract for 13 episodes. She'd only been on screen for 12 at that point, so she had one more to shoot. And that episode was The Conscience of the King. And we really don't know why her role was as small as it was, especially when you consider that the role in Miri was pretty substantial.
Yep.
But it's pretty small. There's a scene when the character Lenore Caridian is talking to Captain Kirk on the bridge, and she's trying to get Kirk to transport her group of actors. And at 14 minutes, 40 seconds, Yeoman Rand steps onto the bridge as Lenore is leaving. And she gives a quick look at Lenore before she walks out of the frame. The expression on Grace Lee Whitney's face looks like she's thinking, what the hell are you doing here? As she looks at Lenore Caridian. Don't you think? Doesn't it look like that's what she's thinking?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
It's a really ironic performance, and it only lasts 4 seconds, and it's Grace's last appearance on Star Trek. And here was somebody who had been hired to be one of the leads.
Right.
After being let go, she was invited back a few more times for cast parties. She wrote in her 1989 biography, "My visits to the studio became less and less frequent over time. It hurt too much to be around Star Trek without being a part of Star Trek."
Which makes sense.
Sure it does. You once you're separated in a situation like that, you really can't go home again. She said she soon acquired a bad reputation in the industry. Quote, "I would show up at interviews reeking of alcohol. I would show up drunk on the set. I'd go home and try to put my emotions back together." Now, this is when she's trying to get other acting jobs. "But the amphetamines weren't working anymore, and the alcohol made me depressed. The drinking and the drugs didn't fix it anymore. Nothing worked." Unquote. So, after leaving Star Trek, she really begins to drink a lot. She wrote, "I ran from everything. I hid from everything. The pain was so intense, I wanted to check out. I wanted to die. So I tried to drink myself to death." Oh, and geez. Later she wrote, "The one person who really reached out to me after I was written out of Star Trek was Leonard Nimoy. He was the only one who really knew how much I was hurting. And he tried very hard after she left the show to try to help her as much as he could." But her depression in the 70s really began to show itself in some really bizarre and strange behavior. And she admits in her book in 1989 that she's not proud of it. To make herself feel better, she married a musician and got a boob job. She had been told many times by different wardrobe guys, "Wow, you're beautiful. Geez, you just have a great body. It's too bad your boobs aren't bigger." And that stuck with her.
It seems like, all the things that she's done up to this point and just continues. It's like she's, an object, not a person.
Yeah, right. I think going to Hollywood, in an industry that is so focused on appearance, and we have to remember she was adopted. So maybe she's carrying some of those insecurities around too, and they're just multiplying.
Right.
So she gets the boob job, and she admits then that she was looking pretty smoking and wanted to show it off, and it kind of then led her to a sex addiction. She had tried to dry out, but instead of drinking, went on to using pot and was sniffing glue and doing other things. She writes that she wanted to turn the tables on men after she had been exploited by them. So she became what she described as a sexual predator. She wanted to make men do what she wanted them to do. She would use sex to control them. And it's funny, though, because she said, I would go out and I would do these things and I would, get high and I would meet new guys and we'd have sex and then I'd go home and it made me physically ill, she would say. It turned my stomach when I thought about what I was doing, but I didn't know how to stop it.
It was like any other addiction, I guess. After you're done, you wake up, you sober up or whatever, and you go, oh boy, that's bad.
Yeah, it's so sad. I mean, in the 70s, during this period, she wrote about this period, she says, I sinned willfully and deliberately, and my sins nearly killed me.
Yep.
Wow. She was on a highway to hell and she was going to drive fast.
Where do we pick up from here, Bob? Let's talk about Star Trek the Motion Picture.
Yeah, it's funny too because she had run into Gene Roddenberry a few years before the motion picture, and he said, "Hey, we're going to make a show, and I want you to come back, and I feel bad about the way you were dismissed in 1966, so I want to bring you back to phase 2." She's happy. She's all excited. When it turns into the motion picture, she discovers I'm being brought back. She's excited. And, we all know that Robert Wise was the director on the motion picture.
Right.
You also know that Gene Roddenberry was a practical joker. He liked to pull practical jokes. And so he decided to welcome Bob Wise to the Star Trek family.
Oh, boy.
By pulling a practical joke. And so he asked Grace to dress up as a real harlot, really kind of dress it up and go into Bob Wise's office on his first day before he had arrived. And he opens the door and he walks in and there she is. And he's like, what the? And she's like, I'll do anything you want, baby. And
geez.
Wise is an older gentleman at this point, kind of freaks out and he's walking down the hall. What the hell's going on? And Roddenberry comes out. Roddenberry's laughing. It's a practical joke. It's okay. We're just joking around. And Grace comes out. And Bob Wise is fuming. And Gene's like, look, seriously, it's just a joke. We used to do this in the 60s all the time. We didn't mean anything by it. And Bob Wise turns from Gene and looks at Grace in the face and says to her, not funny, and walks away. And she had the feeling that he was pretty miffed at her and that anger stayed with him.
Yeah. So Wise kind of gets back at her, right? And he left orders with the makeup department or whoever to make her look plain, kind of, maybe not unappealing, but just not dressed up, right?
Well, and that's so weird too, because, and tell me if you thought this when you saw her, when you first see her, she's behind the transporter console.
Right.
And her hair is up and she's not striking. When she appeared on screen in Star Trek, you'd be like, whoa. And there she was in the motion picture, and you're right, she did look plain.
Right. Her outfit didn't help because it was kind of a tannish thing.
None of those outfits helped.
No, none of them did that.
But you're right, that one didn't help her. She may have looked better in maybe gray or white.
Right.
It's funny because she kind of thought, that Wise was getting back at her. And she said in her book that this was during a period where she'd had a facelift. She'd had the boob job. She was working out. She said, I looked awesome. And actually, in her book, there's a picture of her from 1979, and she does look great. And so it's weird that Wise had her sort of, done up to look kind of dowdy and plain. And
just send her spiraling, didn't it? I mean, she was sober for what, upwards of 8 years there?
Yeah. After that, she started drinking again.
Yeah.
And she said it was really bad. I think there was a line out of her book, something like, I embarrassed people by the horrible things I said and did. I was a nasty, pathetic drunk. That's how bad the motion picture affected her, the experience with Bob Wise.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a shame, but again, I feel so bad for her. This is a lost soul. This is someone searching for fulfillment and can't find it in Hollywood.
Well, I think we've said it already, but she's kind of like the poster child for, what Hollywood does to you, makes you self-conscious about your appearance.
If anything, you can almost compare her to Marilyn Monroe in a sense. Here's someone that you think would have everything going for them, and in their mind, their life's totally destroyed.
Yeah. So in 1980 and 81, she was dating Buzz Aldrin. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, right. The second man to walk on the moon.
Exactly. But I guess it was so bad. I mean, he's suggesting to her to go through the 12-step program to get her life cleaned up a bit.
What a shame, And I think it was during this period in the early 80s where her decline really started to accelerate. Her health was suffering. She was admitted to the hospital with, I think, delirium tremors, hallucinations, blackouts. She was dehydrated. She was suffering from anxiety and fear. And she tells this story in her book. She says her liver was enlarged and distended. She even had a hole in her esophagus from drinking gin.
Gosh.
She was in horrible shape. And the doctor came in and said, look, you have to stop drinking or you're going to die. He said, I think you might have AIDS. It was as AIDS was coming about. And it turned out she didn't, but the doctor wasn't sure. And she writes in her book, she said, my response to this was to control the situation by trying to get him to have sex with me.
Oh, my.
Right.
Yeah, these are nervous giggles, not...
Yeah, right, exactly.
Wow.
You're exactly right. They are kind of nervous giggles because we're both feeling kind of awkward about this. She says she really hit bottom, though, when she went to a party through some acting friends. And this party sort of turned into going to this room in this hotel where there was a group of men waiting for her. Like they knew she was coming. And they wanted to have an orgy. And she jumped in. And this is a quote. I have this quote written down from her book. She says, it was the most dirty, degrading night of my entire life. I was so horrible that one of the men looked at me in disbelief, almost in pity, and asked me, why are you doing this? Whew.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, I have to admit, when a guy looks at a girl and says, why are you doing this? It must be pretty bad.
Yeah, a guy who showed up for it.
Yeah, right. So that's when she's decided to get into a 12-step program and change her life. And she says she went to the program, got into it. She discovered that it had a Christian base, and that kind of called out to her. After one of the meetings, I went home. I hadn't been drinking all day. I was sober. She said, and I knelt down by my bed, and for the first time in 35 years, I prayed, and I gave thanks for my life. She said, and I wasn't drunk, my mind wasn't racing, and I had this sense of serenity. And that was the beginning of her healing. And, going through the 12-step program, making amends, you feel better about yourself. And at one point she was saying, I have to go to meetings every day. She said, because there's just something in me that wants to pull me off track. And she said, and I won't give into it.
Well, she went on later to be big in, I don't know, the 12-step program, but helping others get through their same addictions or whatever, support groups and running support groups.
That's great.
And her son even said when she said the greatest thing she ever did in her life was doing those support groups as opposed to Star Trek.
That's great that she did that. It's, it's so hard because you're a fan. I'm a fan. We love the stories. We love the characters. We've been fans since the 70s. And this is probably the saddest story that we tell in this whole 70s Trek show. This will be the saddest story we tell. And
I hope it is.
I hope it is too. And what really makes me feel good about this sad story, though, is that it does have a happy ending for her.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we continue on with her Star Trek career? So she's in Star Trek 3, Search for Spock. Very small role. She was a woman in the cafeteria. So just a real brief role.
Isn't that a great role for her, though? I mean, she's only on screen for a few seconds, but it's a Janice Rand. And that look on her face as she kind of shakes her head, it's like, what did you guys get into this time?
Yep. And even though it was a small role, she really liked working with Nimoy again.
Oh, that's good.
Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, she was Commander Rand, communication officer. This is the whole whale thing, right? And
right.
And then she was also later at the trial of Kirk and his senior officers. So that's Star Trek 4. She was in Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, and she was on the Excelsior as a communication officer.
Right, Captain Sulu's ship in Star Trek 6.
Exactly, and that comes back around in the Voyager episode Flashback.
She's talking to Tuvok. Yeah.
Tuvok, right.
It was nice to see that she had sort of a substantial role in that, too. It wasn't just a look or a nod, and she actually had some nice lines. I remember watching that for the first time because we really hadn't seen, Janice Rand do much. And so it was nice. It had been a long time.
Right. Well, and I remember the one scene, and she just had one word, but Tuvok and Sulu are talking because Tuvok's trying to talk sense into Sulu, not going off the ranch and disobeying orders. And at one point, she just goes, "Tuvok?"
Right.
And
That's funny.
Yep.
Well, again, her story was a sad one in the middle, but boy, did it have a nice ending. And she lived a long life. She lived to be 85. Grace died of natural causes in her home in 2015. Next week, we look at another show that kept sci-fi alive in the 70s.
It's the $6 Million Man.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.